Good morning. It is a pleasure to be here. I would like to say thank you very much for this opportunity to be part of the EARLI conference in 2021 under these difficult circumstances for all of us. So I'm going to talk about early manifestations of executive functions in the early years school. But before that, I am going to refer to some previous work that we made before starting to look at what happens in the school. So I'm going to share this. Okay. Perfect. So the title of my presentation is Early Manifestations of Executive Functions from the End of the First Year at the Infant School, a Pragmatic View. My presentation is made of 4 parts. In the first part, I will refer to some general issues concerning the executive control of self-regulation of executive functions that we use indistinctly this terminology. Then I will refer to some studies that we made in the context of the home, where children were in interaction with fathers or mothers. And then I'm going to refer to the studies that we are developing in Madrid since a few years in the context of the early years school. All of them, we start with children before the end of the first year of life, and it goes until the middle of the second year of life. This is a common ground. And I am going to present a few concluding remarks. So, first of all, as I said, I'm going to refer to several issues that are important in relation to towards what we understand by executive control. So the first author, of course, one of the first is Luria, that it is so well known by everybody working on this field. And I would like to stress several ideas that for him were very clear. First of all, subjects do not react passively to arriving information, but create intentions, form plans of their action, control their execution, and regulate their behavior. So he focused very much on these issues. And as he said, he was fascinated by language and the place that language could have in this context of self-regulatory processes. Even in the studies that he made with children 12 months old, he was concerned by language. First, the language directed to children from the others, how this could regulate children's behavior, and then the language that children could use with themselves. It is well known that, of course, that in the Vygotskian and Luria tradition, language is an essential tool of self-regulation. This is the semiotic instrument per excellence, allowing the function of self-regulation. And many Vygotskians, until today, they feel and they work very strongly on the idea of this status of language, even if the field is more open now to other semiotic systems before language. Another author essential is, of course, Piaget. According to Piaget, self-regulation is crucial to explain cognitive changes. And if we think about his work on the sensory motor development, we can say that this work is the main objective is to understand how it arrives that the children are able to control their behavior. to control intentionally their behavior. And the picture he shows is absolutely fantastic, because we can follow step by step until the children arrive to the 4th stage of the sensory motor development, and from there, how it develops this form of self-control and of taking in hand the control of their own behavior. And at the end of the sensory motor development, children are able to start to control their own thought also. But it is true that in the literature, Piaget has been very influential, mostly through the A non-B error. But I think that probably this is not enough. All his work should be reconsidered in view of precisely this early development of the cognitive control. And the difference between the Piagetian tradition and the Vygotskian-Allurian tradition is that for Piaget, the focus is not on language, but on action. So his view about this beginning of self-control that the children are able to manifest, it happens through action. It happens through what they do in relation to the material world. So, thanks to Piaget, important authors in this area, like Adele Diamond, Markovich and Zelazo, Jürgen Müller, etc., they accept that the first signs of what we call today executive functions are evident from 8 to 9 months of age. And this is probably because of Piaget was very clear about this issue. And this has inspired many of the research made on this area. Piaget himself, he is very clear about things like the flexibility that children manifest when they are objectives, and these objectives are difficult to attain, and they have to put into work different means in coordination to the ends they are trying to accomplish. He refers also to inhibition. He refers also to keeping in mind an objective and trying to find what kind of means should be put into place. So in fact, if we consider very seriously the observations that Piaget show us, we can put into evidence that the ingredients of the executive functioning is absolutely there. And I am not saying nothing new, because this is something that is agreed by several authors, many authors working on this area. But still, it is still a mystery. There is plenty of lacunes about the origins of executive function in infancy and how it develops. For instance, Kopp in 1982, she said that it was very important to deal with the development of executive functioning, the development of self-regulation. Another issue that is gaining ground now is we need to know more about what kind of goals children give to themselves. What challenges do they establish? What are their own goal-directed actions? Maybe this is because a lot of literature, there is plenty of literature and a very, very interesting literature, of course, putting into evidence the executive control and self-regulation through tasks, standardized tasks, which is very important and very interesting. But probably this is not enough. And this is not enough if we want to understand how it happens, this early development, and how it happens that the children give to themselves objectives, how this work. This is our question. And another issue, maybe that it is linked to the use of tasks, standardized tasks, is that each time more authors, they refer to the need to organize tasks or experimental situations that are more like everyday life situations. And this is true not only on typical development, but also in the field of autism, etc., or in the field of difficulties, neurological difficulties, etc. Like, for instance, now we think about Tirapu. He is very clear about that. Other authors like Berker, White, Carlson, etc., etc., are saying the same thing. And I would like also to refer to the paradox of using tasks that maybe in the case of the adult is not so evident, but in children, this can be very evident. But people working with adults, they refer to this issue. The fact that if you give the instructions and if you give the objectives and if you give what the subject has to do or hasn't to do, then the risk, as Lezac and or Stuss and Alexander would say, or Goldberg, is that the experimenter becomes the frontal lobes of the research participant. By saying that, I don't mean, of course, that tasks should be destroyed or eliminated, of course not. But the only thing is that maybe we should be very cautious about the use of tasks with children during the first or the second year of life. This is my purpose by stressing these issues now. And more people are stressing also the need of making longitudinal analysis, longitudinal designs that can show much better how development happens. And another issue that people like Moro, Whitebread, etc., they point out is the need to put the children in front of significant problems. So the objective is to understand the origin of executive functions, the origin of self-regulation. Language probably is not the best way of looking at this. In a double sense, in the sense that the experimenter telling the child what to do, maybe this is not very interesting because children, they don't understand very well what it is said. And the same in relation to the fact that children are not using a language for self-regulate at this first stage of development. So probably the focus, and this is our hypothesis, is that we should consider two protagonists in these early manifestations. These protagonists are gestures, especially private gestures, when children direct gestures to themselves, and action in relation to what they do with the objects surrounding them or with the instruments surrounding them. This is probably the two focus that we need to make clear if children are able to self-regulate through action and gestures before language. Of course, it doesn't mean that language is not important. Language is absolutely essential in self-regulation. What I am stressing here is that language is not the first semiotic mediation, the first semiotic tool on self-regulation, and is not the unique instrument of self-regulation. But of course, I don't mean at all that language is not important. Once it is in place, of course, it is very important. But my issue here is really the early development of these issues. So I'm going to refer now from a pragmatic perspective to some studies that we made. The first that I am going to present was made with my colleague, Christiane Moreau. It was made in Geneva a long time ago. And in this study, we were trying to understand how children come to understand and use objects by their function, by their cultural function. So we were doing that in Geneva at the time. We started looking at these issues in the 80s, and we followed this during the 90s, stressing that and taking a distance from Piaget, saying that children come to understand the material world and the rules of use of the material world in relation to others. The others, they help children, they guide children in many different ways, and in order to the children to get into this world of uses of objects by their function. So we were looking at that. So our focus at the time was not at all looking at self-regulation, but it happened that a boy, Nelson, when he was 13 months old, it was of course a longitudinal study, when he was 13 months old, he, instead of keeping acting on the wall, instead of keeping using the object with which he has difficulties, he stopped his action and directed the object towards himself in order to think with the object itself. And this was striking, and Christiane Moreau and myself, we were very interested on this phenomena that, as I say, this was not our objective at the time, but it was striking. This change of direction, instead of acting on the wall, the child was directing the wall towards himself in order to think or to solve the problem he had at the moment. So, but this was by accident that we found this. The same happened with this other study that we were made with Pedro Palacios in Madrid. We were looking at making a study, a case study of this girl with Down syndrome. We videotaped her at home and in the early years school also, with a fantastic teacher, very much involved in the situation with Nerea. It was really a very nice study. But our objective here, again, was to understand how Nerea was able to use this object that you have here, a pivot with rings, where rings should be inserted. This is a very common everyday object. And we were looking at that. It was a longitudinal study at home. And the last day, when she was 18 months old, she started to do things like that, showing herself the ring with a great attention, turning it around, again, looking for the position, as the father would say at a certain point. And she did this before trying to insert the ring, which was very difficult for her. So she was trying to solve a problem through these ostensive gestures towards herself, because these were private ostensive gestures. They were not directed to the mother or the father that was also present in the situation. And it was striking because she repeated this type of thing several times with variations. It was not a stereotyped thing. It was really very flexible, but again, it happened that it was like if she was thinking with the object itself about how to solve the problem that she had with the object itself. And she produces also private pointing gestures. In the literature, in the Vygotskian literature, some authors have pointed out the question of the pointing and the place that private pointing they can have as precursors of private speech. I think of authors like Delgado, Gomez, Sarria, etc. But here, the novelty in relation to these other well-known studies is that she was trying to use an object by the function. And she was not telling her, but indicating her, because she is not using language, she was indicating her the place where the ring should be inserted. And she did this also pointing by pointing. This is a touch pointing, immediate touch pointing, because she's touching the referent. Before trying to insert the ring, which was difficult. So, as I said, this happened again. We were not looking at the self-regulatory processes, but it happened. And we were so struck by, it was so striking to see, and so beautiful to see what this girl was doing without asking help. This was really her business, her problem, and she was trying to find her own solutions. And this was even more striking because Nerea, she has Down syndrome, sorry. So this was even more striking for us because of this fact. And really beautiful. I don't show the video, which is fantastic, because I don't think that is going to work properly with this online system, but the video is absolutely fantastic. Then for the first time in Madrid, we decided to look at this systematically, the beginning of self-regulation. And for that, we, with Marisol Basilio, we made two studies. One first study, this has been published in Spanish, with children, a longitudinal study with children from 11 months old until 15 months old. And a second study, this one, with children from 14 months old until 18 months old. In fact, this study was her PhD work. And in both cases, what happened is that it was absolutely evident, it appeared evident that private gestures, they accomplish a function of self-regulation. And more than that, different private gestures could have different functions in the process of self-regulation. For instance, in the process of planification, or in the process of control, or in the process of evaluation. And so what we found before these studies was absolutely confirmed here. And what was evident also here is that objects themselves, they could be used in order to self-regulate also when children have difficulties with them, with the use. And always in these studies made with Marisol, the issue was always how to use objects by their function, how to use them on a canonical way, which is exactly the same type of things that we have been finding before these two longitudinal studies. And now, for the first time, we are systematically looking at this phenomena in the context of the early years school. And we are doing that in Madrid with Ivan Moreno Llanos and Irene Guevara. They are two PhD students that are, their work is very much advanced already. And we are looking at this systematically first on the on the first classroom from 0 to 1. In Spain, we have what we call Escuela Infantil, early years school or infant school from 0 to 6. And after 6, children start the primary school. So the 0 to 6 is composed of the first cycle is 0 to 3, the first 3 courses. So we are looking at what happens in the first class, 0 to 1. It means that children maybe start when they are 4 months old, 7, 8, there is a flexibility there. And they end this first year when they are maybe 17 months or 60 months, 50 months, around that age. So first I'm going to present this study, it's a case study made with this boy, Iago, when he is 11 months and 7 days old. His problem is how to eat with the spoon. At the beginning, it was very difficult. And because never in his life, he had eaten with a spoon on his own. He has always fed by the teacher or the mother, father at home. So for the first time, the teacher places the spoon in front of him and she encourages him to use it. What do you think? So it took a long time to Iago to be able to eat with the spoon. At the beginning, he had several difficulties. We analyzed all that on microgenesis, second by second. This has been published and the videos are included in this paper. If you are interested, you can access to the videos that are very clear. So the pictures here show some difficulties. The first difficulty was first how to grasp the spoon. Then you get here a private symbolic gesture, nyam nyam, about how to eat. This is a proto-canonical use. He had plenty of difficulties about once he is able to grasp the spoon. He made plenty of different things that we call proto-canonical uses, trying to fill the spoon. In that case, this proto-canonical use is dragging it along the plate, right, left. This took a long time. And then we are on the dessert here at the end of the meal. And you get here a series of private ostensive gestures with the spoon, trying to find the position. Here you get more proto-canonical uses. And finally, only at the end, it means that he spent almost 40 minutes until the end, when finally he's able to use the spoon as the spoon. And the teacher, of course, she says is great, etc. So because she sees everything, this teacher, as many teachers, which is very astonishing. So now this study is another study, a case study made with this boy. This is in the same class from 88 months until 17 months. So what we try to systematically identify in this study is how these first manifestations happen, what semiotic systems are involved, what is the status of the action, the uses of objects, gestures, and the material world? What semiotic, what the status, what is the semiotic status of these things involved there? What relation, of course, with other socio-cognitive constructions that are very extremely important and during this period of the life of children. And we, even if our focus is on the child, we could see important things also on the side of the teacher. What is the influence that the teacher is making, is provoking in this child? And I must say that the activities were always planned by the teacher, like in the previous study. The only thing we do is to videotape the children, and we stay invisible in the context of the classroom. We don't propose any task, anything. We just want to understand what is going on in the classroom, and it is the teacher and who planned everything and every activity. So our criteria that are very well established in this publication is that in order to identify a sequence as manifesting cognitive control, 4 criteria must happen. The first and the most important for us is that the child sets the goal. She or he decides what, when, and how fast to go, what to do, when to do, and how fast. It must be evident the attention to the objective, because this is a everyday context. We don't expect that the attention is always on the objective or always on the means to get the objectives, but sometimes probably the attention is off to come again back to attention on. Another issue, another point, another criteria very important for us is flexibility in the means to attain the goal. How this flexibility is manifested through the different uses that children do, as I have previously presented with the child in the previous study. Once again, the child decides how to use the objects and when. And the same with gestures. And of course, sometimes it happens that children, sometimes no, this is another criteria, sorry, that children inhibit the distractions of, so there is an inhibition of distractions from the surrounding. And sometimes it can happen that children make an inhibition of uses that are not pertinent for the target and the objective that they have. We have found also in the case of this study that the child in the last session, when he is 17 months old, he is able to plan before acting. So in that case, planning means that he is taking the material, organizing himself the material before starting the challenge sequence. And another criteria, but it happens sometimes, but only after 13 months old, is that he was able to evaluate his own result. So here you can find some illustrations of different moments. Here he is 8 months, 7 days. Here he is 11 months, 20 days. This is another objective. Here the objective when he is 15 months old and 9 days is in relation to the reading, the book reading. And here his objective is to involve the teacher and himself in a very challenging situation where he eat and he feed the teacher. This was the only moment in this study where he employed symbolic uses. And the challenge was a symbolic situation. What happened before that moment was always in relation to the functional uses of objects as challenges. And then I'm going to present this example that shows something very interesting. The challenge here of this child when he is 13 months old is to insert balls into a device. So he has to retrieve the ball, take the ball to the device and put the ball into the device. All that are canonical uses, functional uses if he wants to insert the ball into the device. But something happened also very interesting in this sequence is that in that case, you can see how he watches his own use with attention. Once he has inserted the ball inside the device, he looks with a great attention, and he repeats this action every time he inserts the ball into the device. At the beginning of the sequence, which is very interesting, we understand this fact like trying to understand what is happening there. Not only his problem is not only having success, but his problem also is understanding how it works. The same thing happened here. Even here is more clear because he's shaking the device, moving it like that, and looking with attention to understand, we consider how the balls drop. So we call it a private canonical use, and the objective here is not success because he's already able to have success, but his aim is more trying to understand. And this fits very well with the work made by Piaget in the 70s about the distinction between réussir et comprendre, to have success and to understand. Piaget gives also very good examples of the sensory motor development with his children about situations similar to those that I am presenting here. And another issue very interesting with this sequence is that once he knows that he is able and he has success with this task, what he does is that he attracts the teacher's attention to show her that he is able to do that. And the teacher reacts very positively, and once again, he sees everything that happens in the classroom, and of course he sees what Elias is trying to communicate her, and it works very well. So this is a very small example of the type of analysis, microgenetic analysis, that we accomplish with different sequences that we select. This is very timing consuming, but it is fantastic when we can see in detail how things happen. So here you get the level of the attention, and here you get the level of the uses of objects and gestures produced by the children, by this child. And there you get what the interventions of the teacher. What is interesting here is that in that case, the teacher, she intervened only saying a few things at the right moment, in the right situation. This is very important. And the only thing she did was to send a ball to the child. Okay, and I am going to finish with this last study that was published recently also. We tried to see in this study in 5 early years school from Madrid, we try to see what kind of challenges children would give to themselves. And we identified 107 educational situations. And from this total, we identified 43 sequences where children manifest cognitive control according to the criteria that I have presented previously. Children were, the ages of children were between 4 and 17 months old. And the first manifestations of executive control happened when they were 8 months old, between 8 and 13 months old. At 8 months old, 2 children were able to manifest this control, another child at 9, another at 10, etc. But most of them were present already between 8 and 13 months old. And the challenges that children gave to themselves, most of them were functional challenges. Some of them, were rhythmic sound challenges, that this happened mostly with musical instruments. So in many sense, this can be considered also like functional uses, because most of them were challenges in relation to how to use musical instruments. And these challenges appear early. So these ones probably are the best candidates for being the first type of challenges, between the first type of challenges. And only in 8 cases, the challenges were to make symbolic uses of objects and instruments. So we considered also in this study the type of educational situations. I am not going to develop very much this. The only idea important here is that with the structures situations where the teacher proposed the material and the children, they do whatever they want with this proposal, with this series of objects proposed, this was the best situation to present self-control and self-regulation in 32 cases. Followed by the situations that we call semi-structured situations, where children have the access to the objects in the classroom. They are free. They have access to the materiality around them. And in this case, they presented eight sequences of self-regulation, at only 3 when the activity was directed, meaning that the teacher is the one that presents and directs the activity. A good example is the book reading, when the teacher reads the book for the group. It doesn't mean that this activity is not extremely interesting from an attentional point of view. In fact, we have published something about the attention that it is required in this context of the book reading. But what happened here is that children, they don't have access to the materiality, and of course, it's much more difficult to get involved with a self-regulatory situation as it was defined. Finally, we can say, even if the focus as I have said, in these studies is not the teacher, we plan to look at more carefully to the teacher activities in future studies. But what we can say, according to the results that we have found, is that their interventions, they happen in the background. They suggest often by placing the material within reach. This is something very important, especially when children, they don't have the access to things because they don't have the mobility, because they are too young. They observe children's action constantly. This is another extremely important point. They give them time and positive evaluations. The fact of giving time, it seems to us very important also. And another influence very clear for us by the teacher is through the material. The material, the choice of the material is extremely important. And for us, it's really very striking to see how they are absolutely good and so pertinent, the materiality that they put, they organize in the classroom for the children. And I have been working on all my career and on the research on early development involved with objects, but really it is now looking at what happened in the classroom that I understand that it is absolutely important, this aspect for children and the development of these aspects. And this is my concluding remarks. I present here a book that we have just, it came out a couple of days ago. And the title of the book, Los objetos sí importan, means objects matter. And in this book, what we present is different studies made in collaboration with several colleagues, universities from South America, from Chile, Mexico, Colombia, and Brazil. And we participate also here in Madrid. And we are really concerned about what happens in the early years school, especially in the 0 to 1 and the 1 to 2 classrooms. And we are convinced that what the teachers, they do there is so important, and so important for the early development and for the development in general, that probably we need to study more carefully what happens there, because probably in other levels on the educational system has the benefit of the plenty of research that has been done in this area. But in these early years, is not so evident to finding research, and we consider that this is an excellent place where developmental psychology and the education and etc. is an excellent place where to collaborate and develop this fascinating area of research. Okay, so I think that I am late now. I have to stop. So thank you, and I hope to see you next month through this format online. Bye bye. Bye.
So welcome everyone again. Here is the Q&A session following Professor Cintia Rodriguez's exciting talk. I guess we should wait a couple of seconds, people to join, because there were many more people attending the talk. But in between, perhaps I will take these few seconds, waiting the rest of attendants to present our keynote speaker, because hi Cynthia, lively now. Thank you. So thank you so much for your exciting and such an interesting talk. It was really very interesting to listen to your talk. Conducting research with very young children and infants has always been very challenging and very interesting in developmental psychology. And as you said, we should be always very cautious with task selection and also the context the context we observe the young children. So thank you very much. So I will take this opportunity to say a few words about Professor Cintia Rodriguez. So Professor Rodriguez studied developmental psychology in the School of Geneva in Switzerland. She worked as assistant in the famous Barbel Ingelders team, and her work has been highly influenced since the beginning of her career by this team and the work that was being done there. She started to work on microgenetic analysis with Madelon Sada Robert. During the 80s in Geneva, she started to develop with Christian Moro the line of research, the pragmatics of the object on early socio-cognitive development. I guess, can you hear me? Are you hearing me?
Yeah,
yes, absolutely. Okay, thank you. Yeah, okay. So this pragmatic and semiotic view of early development is the line of research that she has been developing in Madrid. She developed a group focused on that, a research group named Dede Duca. I can write it afterwards there for those who might be interested in visiting this group of research at the University of Autonoma, the Autonomous University of Madrid, where she works since the early 90s. Cynthia is studying the early manifestations of executive functions from the end of the first year of life in everyday situations in the early years of school, and even earlier, based on what you have presented to us, Cynthia, before. Her focus concerns the challenges that children give to themselves as active agents. She has spent 2 sabbatical years, one in Clark University in the US and one in Portsmouth University in the UK, and she had several stays in South America, like Mexico, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, and Argentina. And of course, she has regular stays in Europe, such as in France, Switzerland, and UK. She has published numerous books, both authored and edited ones, chapters in edited books, and numerous articles in high-impact journals like Human Development, Cognitive Development, Infant Behavior and Development, Infant and Child Development, New Ideas in Psychology. You have seen some of them in her talk, and so on. So thank you very much, Cynthia, for your keynote, such an interesting and exciting talk. So the floor is to the attendees. If you have questions, you may even write them in the chat, or you may raise your hand in this online environment to give you the floor to address direct questions to our keynote speaker. I think there is, yes, they recorded, well, I don't know if the recorded video was interrupted abruptly. I didn't have difficulties. There is a question in the chat. Professor Rodriguez, thank you for your interesting keynote. How is your opinion measuring early executive functions with Bailey scales, Bailey 3 specifically, using an idea to extrapolate executive functions components from Bailey 3? Thank you for your answer. So you can also see at the same time the question in the chat.
Okay. There are different scales, of course, that are very well known, that are very well used. And some of the items, of course, they can be useful. But our concern in the studies that we are realizing in Madrid at the moment is more like trying to understand what happens in the early, in the classroom. We don't modify anything at all. I don't know if it was clear enough on my talk. We had a lot of discussions about this at the beginning of the first study that we realized in the classroom. And finally, we decided that what we wanted was to understand what happened from the point of view of the child, and trying to understand what the teachers, they were organizing, what materiality was propose to children what organization of the materiality took place in the classroom. And our objective here really is a kind of developmental perspective, but put into the classroom. So the idea is that development doesn't happen in an empty wall. Development happens in an everyday life, and school is an extremely important context for children. So this is our focus. Of course, we haven't used any scale, to test children. This can be done, of course, to see on one side what kind of self-regulatory aspects we find in the classroom, and then use scales. Of course, this is possible, but our focus at the moment is trying to understand what kind of challenges are the challenges that children give to themselves, and how the teacher promotes this type of challenges. This is our question. But of course, in the different scales, you find tasks that could be interesting in relation to the issues that I have presented. There is no doubt.
Okay, thank you very much. I see a raising hand by Pablo Torres. Pablo, could you please raise your question?
Hi, Cynthia. Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for such an interesting talk. It was really fascinating. I have to say, I don't work with the really early children, I mean, really young children, but after having twins a year ago, now I have become very, very interested in this age. And one thing I'm really wondering about is, how do you know, in your studies, how do you know when a task is appropriate in terms of, when a child is actually trying to reach a particular goal, right? Because you say that you are interested in trying to understand how they behave when they set themselves challenges, right? So there's a goal that they might have in mind, right? And I'm thinking, I see my children like doing a lot of things. Sometimes they, as one of the children you showed, they laugh back and say, surprised about what they've done, right? And like super happy. But I don't know if that was actually what they were trying to do. You know what I mean? So it's like, I wonder, when do you know that they actually are trying to achieve something in particular? Okay. And therefore,
Thank you, Pablo. Excuse me, Pablo. Let's give the floor to Cynthia to respond, because there is another question and time is flying.
Sure.
So,
thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Pablo. This is an excellent question. The criteria we use to be sure that there is a challenge going on there are the 4 criteria that I presented. So first of all, the child is, there is a persistency. He is or she is trying to do something difficult, and there is a persistency on it. There is not abandon, but trying once and again and again and again. Another criteria is the distinction between means and ends. We don't consider that there is a challenge if there is no this distinction between means and ends. In that point, we follow very much Piagetian criteria about the 4th stage on early development. Another criteria is the attention. When the attention is absolutely there, you get this very clearly, even if the attention sometimes can be off. Another criteria is flexibility. You see how the child try on one side and then try on another side and do this thing and do another thing. So the flexibility is extremely important. And inhibition also. Inhibition, because we focus on the everyday life, there is a lot of things going on around the children. So when the attention is going on and off, it means that they are really interested on what they are doing. And you have pointed out something very important is the excitement when they know that they have realized what they wanted to do. And you mentioned your children, and this is very evident in the work made by Marisol Basilio. This was very clear when the satisfaction when they have accomplished something. And they applaud maybe looking at others, but other times they applaud for themselves. And as I mentioned previously, in the case study that I presented, this child was very clear about his success when he was 30 months old, by applauding to himself, saying, okay, it is very good what I have done. And planification, this is more difficult. We find planification later on. But as I said, we need several criteria to be sure that executive function is working or cognitive control is working. Something must be difficult. This is the point. And even if it is difficult, children try once again and again and again. And this is very fascinating, because why to persist in something that it is difficult? Must be very interesting for them.
Thank you very much. That's very clear. Thank you.
Cheers. Okay, thank you. There is another question, and so Chiara, could you please address your question to our keynote?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your wonderful presentation. I'm working on executive function in developmental disorders. So I'm really interested in studying how working earlier on executive function may represent a protective factor for several special needs. So I'd like to know your opinion on the on the implications that your studies may have on the educational policies, in particularly in a longitudinal perspective. I'm thinking to the primary school when many developmental disorders emerge. I think that as in the years we lost the actions in the primary school, while children may act in the infancy school, but then at the primary school they are fixed on the table, they can't do experiments. So I'd like to know whether this factor, according to you, can be dangerous for the development of executive function and thus reduce their protective role. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your interesting question. What I can say in relation to children with special needs is that we should pay much more attention to these early years of school. In my opinion, this is essential. Primary school is too late to start with policies involving what to do in relation to the special needs children. We need to focus really on what is going on, what happened during the first and the second year of life. There is no doubt. In fact, what I can say also is that our line of research in Madrid started with with Nerea, this girl with Down syndrome. And we never published what we did in the early years of school. We published only the situations at home. But what happened in the early years of school is that this school was very much involved in the Nerea development. The teacher was absolutely fantastic. She made a lot of work even with other children in trying to promote Nerea's development. she was very happy in the classroom. She was able to be very creative. She had plenty of opportunities to be creative and to develop things. And of course, this is a very different situation from what happens when in the primary school, when children are sitting without movement in a chair. And this is happening also in the early years of school more and more. And this is, honestly, we shouldn't go on that direction. Children, in order to be creative, in order to develop their own challenges, they need a space of freedom, and they need a good reflection about what material world is interesting for them. And another issue that to us is very important is that we should pay a lot of attention to the professionals that are working in this early years school from 0 to 1, from the first class. Because I don't know in other countries, but in Spain, for instance, they don't get the same salaries as other levels in the educational system. And this is a paradox, because to me, if we want to make a good job, we need to insist on these early years and to invest there. If in the case of the special needs children, especially educational needs children, this discourse is even much more important. I have no doubt about that.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Since it is the break now, may I take the opportunity to address the question to you, Cynthia, and then we should, if there is no other question, of course. Based on your work, have you found any individual differences in relation to the onset of the first self-regulation, let's say, skills, and if the time, let's say, of the onset of self-regulation in the early months and years could be a predictor for later self-regulated learning skills? Of course, you need longitudinal data. Yeah,
absolutely. This is something that, in relation to the context, the school, in relation to education, in the context of the school, we started to see, for instance, that with my colleague from Gabriela Mieto from Brazil, we noticed that in a couple of Brazilian schools where she and her team developed observations, we noticed that some of the teachers in this context, they do too many things, not allowing children to do and develop things. So what I can say is that what happens in the context of the school probably is extremely important in order to understand what is going on after in the context of the school, even in relation to the self-regulatory aspects. It is true that our focus is a microgenetic focus, and at this point we are trying to understand how this happens. But in the future, this type of things, I am sure, should be developed, and to understand how this can predict later outcomes from a self-regulatory aspect. There is no doubt.
Okay, thank you very much. I don't see any other questions, so we would like to express our sincere thanks again to our very special keynote speaker. Thanks a lot, Professor Rodriguez, for such an exciting talk. So see you all later on, somewhere and somehow in the conference. So thank you very much. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye. See you.
Thank you for your presentation. Bye. Bye. Thank you. Thank you.